Leadership does not mean being bossy, always telling others what to do. No, leadership means going ahead, not putting others in the front. Good leaders lead by example, not by decree. Miles Monroe said that one time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, episode number 16, Leading from the Front with Colonel John Conrad. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's your host and founder here, Scott McCarthy, for the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. I hope you are doing outstanding, because the Lord knows I am. I got a great show today. I've been really excited about this show for quite some time. Today, you get the pleasure of listening to Colonel John Conrad, a now retired Colonel Conrad, I should say, a retired Canadian Army officer who served in Afghanistan and is currently a senior executive within the Alberta government here in Canada. Before I get into that, though, I want to, reach out to everybody. And the first thing I'd like to say is welcome back to all the listeners out there who've come back, because I know there are actually thousands of you, which is mind-blowing to me. I want to thank all of you. If this is your first time listening to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, well, welcome. You've come across a podcast which is basically about practical examples of leadership, how you can make yourself a better leader every day. Before we dive into the interview, I just want to go over a few different resources and tools and things I have out there for you to help you in your journey, which I feel has helped me or I think will help you. So the first off is the best read section within my website. If you don't know my website yet, it is www.movingforwardleadership.com. The whole thing spelled out, okay? And in there is a best read section, and I have currently 4 books in there, which I feel has helped me throughout my leadership journey. 3 which are directly related to leadership, and another one which is actually more direct about how you can operate at your peak level. And it is quite interesting, that one in particular. There's another one regarding, which is called Leadership Itself, from retired General and Chief of Defense Staff Rick Hillier, of course. 360-degree leadership from John Maxwell, who's a world-renowned leadership speaker and author. And then the final one is Leaders Start With Why from Simon Sinek, who is definitely up there right now, and I would say probably one of the current leadership gurus on the speaking stage, as well as touring around. So those reads are there for you. If they're interesting to you, you can swing by the website again and go under the best read section, and it'll explain there to you why I feel these books are important and how they have helped me in the past. And just click on the link and it'll take you right to Amazon. You don't have to go searching through Amazon at all. Click the link I got there for you. It'll take you right to Amazon where you can purchase it if you so choose to do so. Follow me on Facebook. I go ahead and I push out, various quotes, various things, stuff that you may not necessarily get from the podcast. Okay, definitely up there. So follow me on Facebook. And then the next thing I like to talk about Facebook is the Facebook Moving Forward Leadership group, right? A group. And this group is dedicated to building a leadership community, I would say. A community where people can come in and discuss leadership topics to their heart's desire. And there's not really one out there yet. So I'm trying to make this one. I kind of need your help to do so, right? I know there's thousands of you listening to this podcast, so obviously you're on a journey yourselves. So why not come to this group, okay, and join so that you can have discussions. I'm in there. There are a number of other people that are in there, okay? Come on to the group. Let's have some leadership discussions. Because the reality is that if you were to join some of those masterminds out there, leadership masterminds, and I'm not going to go down any roads or saying any names or anything, but they're out there, and they're reputable and all that. But you're looking at spending hundreds of dollars. I mean, I was looking at one, I believe it was like $400 or $500 US. That's got to be like $3,000 Canadian by now with our dollar right now. It's an incredible amount of money. And the reality is that with everybody's expertise, me included, I think we can build this for free for everybody. So let's do that. Okay, so swing by facebook.com/groups/moving forward leadership and as well, you can get it from the show notes, which will be movingforwardleadership.com/podcast/Conrad. Okay, CONRAD, as in John Conrad. So that's where the show notes will be. There will be a number of things added in there, and I'll explain it as we go on. So think about that. Swing by Facebook page, swing by the group, and like one, follow it, and then join the group, okay? Next thing, of course, I am on Twitter, so Moving Forward Leadership, so MFL, as in Moving Forward Leadership _podcast, and that's how you can follow me on Twitter. Of course, if you have any suggestions, questions, anything at all, you want to reach out to me directly, feel free to email me at scott@movingforwardleadership.com, or do it through Twitter or either one of the Facebook avenues. Next off, you should swing by the website and sign up for my monthly newsletter. And in that newsletter, you'll get little tidbits of what I'm doing in the background to make this podcast and site, etc. better, as well as I'll inform you of all the episodes which I pushed out during the month. And finally, there will be different news clips and tidbits in there which I found interesting throughout the month. So no, I'm not going to spam you. I'm not going to sell your email address. I'm not making any money off of this. It is surely another resource to help you, okay? So if that interests you, just swing by the website, movingforwardleadership.com. At the top right corner, you'll see sign up for my monthly newsletter, and just put your info in there. Don't forget to check your spam folder, because I do require a confirmation. There is a confirmation email that gets sent to you, which you have to go through the process to confirm that, yes, in fact, you want to sign up for this newsletter. Next thing to keep in mind, if you're listening to this, you should be subscribed to this podcast, okay? So that's either through iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, or whatever podcasting app you are using, okay? So subscribe to it so you don't miss an episode, because each episode is different. You'll find that. Each episode is completely different, and they continually, not necessarily build on each other, but they interlock to each other. And I also, in the show notes, put in related episodes where I talk about previous episodes which are related to the current one that's being in discussion. So you'll want to make sure you're subscribed. And while you're subscribing, please do me a huge favor, and that is leave a review and rating. These things mean they're gold to podcasters like myself, because they push us up on the charts and gives us more exposure to the world out there. So if you're enjoying this, if you enjoy what I have to say, apparently thousands of you do, then I ask you, just take 30 seconds of your time, if not a minute, max 2, and swing by, subscribe, as well as leave a rating and a review saying how much you enjoy the show and what I have to say thus far. And then the final thing I would say is, if you truly love what I'm saying here and you want to help me make this better, then you can. And I've set up a Patreon account for that specifically. If you don't know what Patreon is a website which allows people to support artists across the whole spectrum of art, per se, okay, and podcasters included. It allows people to support them through basically donating funds, and there are some things in return that you get. So I won't go down through the whole gamut of the list of the different tiers. There are 3 different tiers, okay? You do get something in return. You can support me as little as, I believe, $2 a month, all the way up to $15 a month, all right? And you can start and stop anytime you want. It could be a one-time deal, or you could go ahead and subscribe for $15 a month for the rest of your life if you really cared, which would be amazing to me. So if you're interested in that, feel free to swing by Patreon. So that is Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/MFL, as in moving forward _podcast. That's where you can go ahead and support me. All right. Hope all those things help you or interesting to you or whatever. Now we're about to get into the episode. Again, today's episode I've been really excited about for a long time. It was a long time in the making, just to scheduling, getting myself and Colonel Conrad's schedule sorted out so that we were both free at the same time. Luckily, we've finally been able to do it. So John Conrad, if you don't know who he is, he's a two-time author, first off, and a one-time Canadian bestseller. And I'm sure he's going to be a two-time Canadian bestseller as well, because his second book literally just got released within the past, not even a month right now. Okay? It'll probably be a month by the time you're actually listening to this, if you listen to it first thing when this episode gets released, which I'm sure you are. So John's a two-time author, one-time bestseller. John was also a former Reg Force Lieutenant Colonel within the Canadian Army as a logistics officer, much like myself. He deployed to Kandahar, Afghanistan in 2006 and commanded the National Support Element for that mission. And you'll hear a lot about I wouldn't say a lot, but you'll hear about that throughout the interview. After his redeployment from Afghanistan, he suffered some setbacks, which he'll get into. And then eventually he decided to go to the primary reserve, where he obtained a rank as full colonel, as what we refer to as full colonel, and commanded a brigade for a couple of years. He's currently now an executive director within the Albertan government, and he'll talk about that within the interview. Outstanding man, outstanding officer, has a lot of great things to say. The one caveat I will put out there is that he does go into some pretty strong opinions from time to time throughout the interview. I'd like to reiterate, this is his opinions, not mine, okay? They belong to him. I am still serving, so I can't have any opinions at this moment in time of my life. So, nonetheless, hope you enjoyed this interview, because Lord knows I enjoyed it in doing it for you. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, here's my interview with Colonel Retired John Conrad. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. Again, it's your host and founder, Scott McCarthy. Today, I got the honor and privilege of having Mr. John Conrad here. John, thank you very much for coming out to talk to both myself and my listeners out there.
Well, Scott, it's an absolute pleasure, and I have been looking forward to having this conversation with you. Thanks a lot for inviting me.
I've been looking forward to it as well, and I know actually a lot of my daily work colleagues are actually even looking forward to this chat that we're about to have. So again, thanks for taking your time. I know you're a busy man. You started off and you rose up through the ranks of the Canadian Army all the way up to Lieutenant Colonel on the regular force side and commanded troops in combat over Afghanistan. And then you flipped over to the primary reserve, and now you're a full colonel commanding a brigade, isn't it? You're a brigade commander out west, I do believe.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I turned over command of 41 Canadian Brigade Group last August after 3 years of command as the brigade commander. But no, you essentially, that is ding on.
Yeah. And now you're executive director within the Albertan government. So obviously, regardless of being military or not military, you've risen up through the ranks of being a leader. So I guess my first question is, what basically led you down this road from growing up in good old Newfoundland like myself to now being an executive director where you're at?
Well, yeah, that's a very open-ended question, but I'll try and do my best to put the pucks in the net on this. First of all, I've got to correct you. I mean, I know Christy Blatchford, in one of my books, she called me a Newfoundlander. But I think she meant that I sounded like one, and I mean that as a tremendous compliment. I love the Rock and men and women from Newfoundland. But no, I actually grew up in southwestern Ontario on a farm, until I joined the Army at age 19. But yeah, so I better set the record straight there. And just in case my mom is listening to your podcast, love Newfoundland, but I'm from good old Ontario. But in terms of entering the leadership as a profession or the military's profession, some of it harkens back to being raised on that farm. And I can still remember being in high school and having to make the choice. I hated guidance counselors, not the people, but the function of filling out all those punch cards and forms to try and determine what to do with your life after high school. To me, it just seemed like too hard a problem to solve. And, loved working outside, loved working with my hands. I liked the immediate reward of finding out if you were successful or not with your fencing or repairing the hay baler or what have you. And when the opportunity came up to talk to some RMC cadets who'd come out, and I think it was my grade 11 or 12 year, kind of got this idea that, you know what, a career in the Canadian Armed Forces might be a way to combine the love of farm, being outside, working with my hands, but also having a sincere interest in academics and learning, getting a degree. I think that was probably the primary analogue, was entering the Royal Military College. And, not that I was a tremendous cadet. I think if you crossed over to RMC tonight after this conversation, you'd find a lot of material that would not back that up. But that was really how I got that start. And in terms of developing some of the leadership potential that I guess I had, right? And anyway, rambling a bit there, but I think that's probably the best descriptor, is kind of where I started on the farm and looking to do something with my degree that would combine a career outside and challenge me.
No, that's great, sir. Like, there's actually quite a number of similarities between us, less the Newfoundland thing. So thanks for the clarification. And if you want to honor citizenship of Newfoundland, just let me know. I'll hook you up.
Okay, I can kiss the cod.
You definitely kiss the cod. And for our listeners out there, just if you have no idea what we're just talking about, just Google Screech in, and you'll figure that one out.
Yeah, amen.
So, you as I discussed, you rose up through the ranks, and now you're sitting pretty high within the Albertan government and in leadership roles. So obviously there's been a number of challenges throughout your career, or careers, I could say.
Yeah.
What have been some of the greatest ones that you can reflect on right now?
Yeah, I think, there probably are a couple of points in my career where I look at being the biggest challenges, and points where I felt like giving up. And I think the first one I would characterize was kind of in tandem with we used to call it the Force Reduction Plan, FRP. And there were two ways of the FRP. This was back when the mighty Canadian Armed Forces was around, was it around 80,000 and we were headed to 60, or were we 100? I can't remember how large we were. I think it was, I want to say it was 80, but we were headed towards the number of 60,000 folks, which is, I believe, is more or less where we are today with our defense budget. And they had offered a number of FRP opportunities. So you're sitting there as a young captain, and you can fill in your form there's certain financial benefits, certain educational benefits. And, I found that tough because this was my career. I left, those 3 channels of television on the farm to go and go through, get my degree at RMC and to apply my craft. So, the number of folks that they got for force reduction, they met their targets, obviously, but the quality of people they got, they weren't the intended targets in a lot of cases. I saw people my age, that were relatively new leaving. And, I found that difficult. I guess not as much as a leader, but as a member of the tribe. This talent, people that I respected, walking out to become veterinarians or to go on to become medical doctors. And they were all talented people. I really began to question my choice for a period. In fact, I even considered going and becoming a large animal vet myself for a time. But in the end, I did stay. And I'm glad that I did, because it was the right career path for me. The other part that I found was a particularly challenging time as a leader was the whole debacle of the Somalia inquiry. And you'll remember that period. General Leader has referred to it as the decade of darkness. But there was a time when, after the events that happened in that tour, I believe that was February of '93, when the Shadena Roan had been murdered by one of the members of 2 Commando, the Airborne Regiment. And it just set in motion all of this bloodletting about spin doctoring and the control of information. And some of our leadership had behaved suboptimally during that period. And I remember having friends and family and even my own sister challenge me, like, what are you doing with this organization? And even listening to some of the testimony at the Somalia inquiry, it was embarrassing to hear what some very senior people were saying about control of information and what was owed to the public. Forget aside the murder of the Somali kid, which was repugnant in its own merits. But it was a low point for me because I try to live my life according to an ethical code, Scott. Like all of us who wear the uniform, we're drawn in based on some primary analogous desire to serve, or desire to leave the world a better place. And here was this very fundamental series of events and this drawn-out inquiry that just kept showing how the wider organization might not be wired the same way that its captains were or that its sergeants were. So that was definitely a difficult time for me as leader, for me as soldier in the Canadian Armed Forces. But again, I stuck it out and tried to accentuate the positives and lead from where I was, as a lot of men and women did in the Canadian Forces back in those dark times. Hell, I remember Doug Martin coming in as defense minister and freezing all of the officer, forget what we call them, incentives, pay incentives for a 2-year period, just because all of the officer corps needed it. Dark time. So there's a couple that caused me to stop and think, did I get on the wrong bus?
So it's fair to say that, most of your challenges actually came from, much higher than you, than you acting as a leader yourself?
Well, I mean, I've got some. I think I'm going to keep that powder dry for some of your subsequent questions that are more tactical in nature. I'm the kind of person, though, when I join an organization, I like to look at the strategic imperatives. I like to think about the big picture, as a lot of us are in the military, whether we're corporals or whether we're generals. But yeah, I have had my own significant challenges of leadership where I'm readily good to go to share those too. But I think some of the other questions that you had tantalized me with, I think we're going to go down that path here in a second.
Yeah, for sure. So why don't we just look at the other side of the coin then, some of the great successes you've enjoyed, because no doubt I'm sure there's been some of those as well, right?
Yeah, successes for sure. And I mean, when I look back on my career, I think the thing of which I'm most proud is that Kandahar tour in 2006 as a battalion commander of the Canadian NSC during the Task Force Orion period. We had replaced the 173rd Airborne Brigade as a multinational brigade, and we had one PPCLI as our battle group, and of course elements of my one service battalion, also from Western Canada, as part of the logistics, well, as the whole enchilada for logistics. I mean, we were the Atom Company for one PPCLI, as well as the second and elements of third line, to use the old doctrine terminology. That was a difficult time to be a leader in that unit, because force levels being what they were, the task force was canalized into a political number, and you can't grow beyond that number. And when we looked at the job of Kandahar province in terms of projecting combat power and the kill capture mission with the Taliban, 225,000 square kilometers of AOR for the Canadian task force. So clearly, you want to add as much combat power as you can. We added a lab-free company, to the mix. They added that spectacular artillery battery with the brand new M777. They added a TUAV squadron to do the overflights. Remember the old flying Volkswagen there, the spareware? All of these things were necessary, but what there was no appetite for, because it was logistics, right? I mean, logistics happens. There was no appetite for increasing the size of the Canadian logistics outfit, the NSC. And I still remember, like it was yesterday, briefing General Dave Fraser in this tent on the Kandahar airfield. about the NSC, and showing him the math for materials technicians, battle damage repair, recovery, what we're going to need in order to sustain what I think Lieutenant Colonel Ian Hope is going to be doing. And I know Ian's talking about this and this, so this means this many logisticians, and Dave Fraser just looking at me like, whoa, like, wake up, right? You're capped at 300. You do get that, right? And that for me was the hairs in the back of my neck stood up in terms of battlefield geometry and the lines of time and space in 225,000 kilometers, leading a small unit. And at no time during that tour did my unit tip the scales beyond 285 people. Just the way TO&Es, like tables of organization and equipment, just the way they get filled in. They never get 100% filled. And it was a very small unit with a very, very big problem, and what I have called the Taliban summer in my books, the summer of 2006. So leading these men and women through that, and that was a very difficult challenge for all of us. And I see that as probably my signature moment as a leader during my 34-year career.
Oh, no doubt. Like, I think it's probably every Army officer's, dream to command troops in the theater of operations, regardless that's combat operations or even, humanitarian assistance operations, whatever. Just to be able to command troops in an operational area would be a dream come true. So one I haven't necessarily been fortunate to experience just yet, but, I might have a couple of years left to go before I call it quits. Throughout your time, you talked about some challenges, you talked about your success. What would you consider to be like probably the largest setback you've had, throughout your time?
The largest setback?
Yeah. The biggest defeat or the time the thing that really put you back the most. And I think you kind of hinted at them a bit in your challenges, but I wonder if there's one that truly sticks out.
Yeah, I think the largest setback for me is probably the one that I talked about in Among the Walking Wounded, and I might not be hitting the right octave of your question, but so feel free to rephrase and come at me again. But the biggest setback I had was when I came back from my tour, in the one that I just spoken about. There were a number of events that happened on that tour, and one tactical event specifically that ended up changing my psychological outlook in terms of some trauma that I experienced on a convoy. And you have to appreciate that the battlefield of 2006 in Afghanistan, it's a battlefield that's defined by how empty it is. The asymmetric battlefield or non-contiguous, however you want to describe it. In terms of a combat activity, double suicide attack coming back from Helmand Province with a very long column, that damaged me. And I guess the coming back to Canada, and I was posted to the Army Staff College immediately on return to Canada. And I didn't come back to my battalion ever in Edmonton. It was Edmonton Airport overnight, and then out to Ontario and on to my next assignment, which I found very difficult to move on without the context of the men and women we had gone through those 7 months with. So, you talk about a setback. As I got further and further into my job teaching the Army's bright young captains at the Command and Staff College in Kingston, all of these little boxes of emotion and recollection that I had packed up and locked away started to unpack and burst open at a very alarming rate as I went down to Kingston on IR as well to make matters even worse. Because of my wife had good employment further up the 401. We owned a beautiful 50-acre farm near the Bowmanville area. My kids who had suffered, as any family suffers during a deployment like that, but they were starting to get some traction. So I was on IR as well. And the setback was largely of my own manufacture in terms of the trauma I was dealing with. and my own internal workings. I would overreact to things. I was angry all the time. My dreams were enormously organic. Picture the most realistic dream you've ever had in your life, whether it was happy or sad or what have you, right down to the nth detail. I had those all the time. Generally about ammunition, sometimes about that double suicide attack that I had lived through with my men and women. Yeah. And, Scott, the hardest thing, and this is what I've tried to give voice to inside the book as someone who suffers with PTSD. The hardest thing was I lost my will to work. I'd always wanted to be posted to the Army Staff College as an instructor. That was a career dream. I couldn't get up for it. I couldn't care less about polishing my boots. I couldn't care less about the material. I couldn't read a memo. If you gave me a memo from the commandant that was longer than maybe a paragraph or two, I couldn't get it into my head, right? So couldn't focus. And in a college like that is heavily focused on the absorption of material and the presentation of stuff you learned the day before, the next day, it was a really devastating setback. And I was completely at sea. I didn't know where to go, what to do. I couldn't convey that to my career manager or to anyone in a leadership role inside my branch that I for some reason, I'm like a turtle on a post. I can't go ahead. I can't go back. I need help. And that help was not there in those days, at least not in my context. And I felt that I had no option but to even go further back and quit, which I did.
For someone who didn't get my question, you certainly hit it out of the park. You talked about all that in your PTSD. Would it be fair to say this was the motivation for you to write your second book? For you? Oh,
yeah, without a doubt. Absolutely. Yeah, no, you're right on the mark there. Speaking of hitting things out of the park, the story in this book that has just been published has been rattling around in my head since July 22nd of 2006, and even my earlier work, What the Thunder Said, which I'm proud of. It's a book with a lot of rough little edges in it, and you'll see that. It's an enjoyable read. It did very well. It's a Canadian bestseller, but you'll see when you read it, for some of your listeners, there are rough edges. It's certainly, but it was a way for me to start to make sense of what had happened, as a writer and as an officer. And Stephen King is very famous for saying, I write so I know what I think about things. And I totally understand and I'll tell you, Stephen King, heavily underappreciated writer in our time. But that's another podcast for another day. I totally identify with what he said. And the second book, now a few years removed from What the Thunder Said, it's more about the down and in, the psychological landscape that went on during the tour, because I set the context with the actual point of wounding. What the clinicians tell me are probably the tactical event that tore it for me. Against this backdrop of knowing that I've got too few people. I lost one of my sergeants, like a bishop on your chessboard, 2 days after the TOCA, the Transfer of Command Authority. So against this backdrop of knowing I haven't done well enough for my people and brought enough, and then you keep going through hit after hit after hit, because the summer of 2006 was the summer that the Taliban and their leadership in Pakistan were screaming to have Kandahar city back in their hands. And there was no damn way that the Canadian task force was letting that happen. So yeah, this book, the motivation for it was to try and articulate, to my family, to my wife, to my kids who are still not quite sure, to friends that I've not spoken to in years and have no desire to speak to me because I was not really a very nice person to be around for a number of years. It's to try and articulate what happened and to punctuate the fact that we have a lot of walking wounded right now who have not come back from no man's land. They're stuck beyond the parapet for want of a conversation. And starting a conversation is the hardest thing in the world when you have this kind of a disorder. And I'm hopeful that in writing this book, I'm going to give people a safe place to initiate that conversation so they can come back to.
That's awesome. As someone who knows, I shouldn't even say no, who has multiple friends and subordinates who've been battling with this for a number of years now, I'd like to thank you for writing it to help, hopefully it'll help people down the road and help them themselves as well. So, thanks for doing that.
Yeah, you're welcome, Scott. Thanks for those words.
Yeah. I'd just like to, change gears up a bit here. And, if you were to, go back in time, basically at the beginning where you started this journey from day one, basically as you're marching through the arch, what piece of advice would you give to yourself during that time?
Yeah, I think, and this may sound very cliche, but I think what I would tell myself is be patient. I wouldn't want to dim. I mean, I was altruistic. I was optimistic. And I dream big. I still dream big. I try to keep the gun barrels up all the time. And I encourage the folks that I work with, encourage my own kids, dream big. I wouldn't change that at all. As I'm marching through the arches, as you characterize. But what I would really pull myself aside, and I would make myself sit down and look out over Lake Ontario. I know the very spot by the arch where I would do it. I'd say, just be patient. Don't let the highs get you too high or the lows get you too low. And good things do come to those who wait. I guess, people that know me, they know I'm an emotional person, right? That doesn't mean I break down and bawl every time something pear-shaped happens, or I laugh every time something humorous happens in an uncontrollable way. But my first reaction to a crisis, whether it's military or whether it's here in my civilian workplace, is generally emotion. I've got the skills to keep that to a few nanoseconds. And sometimes that emotional response in my military career, it's led me to be a bit impetuous. Certainly earlier on as a young officer, less so as a lieutenant colonel. But every now and again, even as an old colonel, I've let my mouth get me into corners that I'm sure some of my superiors found less than desirable. So my advice would be patient, right? And everything that implies in terms of picking your battles, in terms of sometimes you don't have to say something, right? I'm one of these folks that I live in fear of that pregnant pause. And because of that, I sometimes rush to fill it. And usually it's with something that's not particularly inspiring or well conceived. So my advice to John Conrad, 1987, stay the course on 90% of the way your head is oriented. But remember, be patient. It's a long game.
Oh, that's great advice, sir. Thank you for so much of that. We're going to wind down a little bit here. I just got a couple questions left. I'd like to focus on, where you think that leaders are failing today, and what can we do for the new generation to learn from that? Where do you think we're at today with that?
Right. So I think leaders are failing today because of how we handle language and how we handle people. I mean, I find so much of our leadership is rhetorical in terms of whether it's political leadership tweeting about something that they just did or are about to do, as opposed to having a meaningful conversation. I think we live in an era, an age of rhetorical leadership where there's so many handlers, even in the case of senior military officers. You try getting to a lieutenant general or a major general through the reams of staff that surround that person. We don't take the time to actually think about problems and to get things done. And a good case in point is how crappy the no man's land is between the Department of National Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs. There's no excuse for that in my mind. Two ministries of government and a broken soldier who is legitimately wounded or broken in his service to Canada has to start from square one to build his file up or her file up with Veterans Affairs Canada. Now, I'm sure there'll be listeners who are listening to this and wringing their hands and furrowing their brow and saying, well, you're obviously out of date. We're doing this now and we're doing that now. And they'll point to some initiative. And to that, I say, well, it's about bloody time. And for years, we have been resistant to doing this because of stovepipes in the government of Canada, ironclad stovepipes. And to me, that is rhetorical leadership. If you care about soldiers, and you automatically care about veterans, why wouldn't you want to facilitate a transfer between two departments? Disgusting, right? The other thing is we are always in such a hurry, to get to the next meeting or the next piece or the next conference. My advice, what I think we lack is authenticity, to spend time in the moment with the people that you're with in terms of majors and corporals, and actually listening to them and actually investing, being in the moment with them. I see too many people scurried off, got to be here, got to be there, taking the brief that's already been written for them. And I'm not just picking or speaking on military leadership here. I mean, a lot of our leaders. And here inside the public service, I still work in the public trust, and to a certain extent in private industry. Authentic leadership means you have to spend time. I mean, what's the big rush? What are we in such an enormous hurry to do that we can't spend time talking with people, taking care of people? And again, the soldiers are job one, people are job one. I do find that is rhetorical for a large extent. And we need to stop treating it that way and taking care of our men and women and each other. And, I think that PowerPoint, and I'm sorry I'm rambling, but you did invite me on, Scott. I think PowerPoint has done to the leaders what the hockey helmet did to hockey. It's suddenly everyone now has got to have the slide deck. They've got to have the brief package. And that doesn't generally mean that you're preparing it. And I think that there's too many trappings. There's too much of these side pieces that get built for our leaders, that we really lose a lot of those great leadership quotients that they have in the translation. And just some extraneous thoughts there, but clearly some heartfelt ones. I mean, I just read recently, and I'll stop talking, I promise. Read recently about the Canadian Armed Forces deciding that we won't put soldiers out, because of this long wait for pensions, that we won't put them out of the service. They'll continue to draw their pay until their pension kicks in. And thinking, well, yeah, that's an announceable. And that took how many years and months to put into effect? To me, that announcement signifies to me a lot of what's wrong with our leadership today. That should have been done at hello. And I know, in fairness, people will tell you, if you're not inside, you don't realize it's hard to inculcate these changes. Yeah, but it's not impossible. And that's the wheelhouse of the leader.
Absolutely. You kind of hit a couple of my own nerves there, and often will tell my guys, let's not rush to failure whenever something pops up, right? And you're kind of talking about that. And as well, I keep saying that the one thing we do the most is the thing we do the worst, and that's communication. And that's exactly what you're talking about there across all lines.
Yeah.
So no, it's also all kinds of great words. I'm going to pretty much wander down there. I do have one last question there, Colonel Conrad, that I asked all of my guests on, and I never prepare them for it. So I'm kind of throwing you on the spot here, but what do you think makes a great leader, in your own words?
Yeah, authenticity. Authenticity. They say William Shatner was so effective when he played Captain Kirk because of the scheduling for, daytime television back in the 60s. Not a lot of time to rehearse. And you're going boom, boom, boom. You're cranking out an hour-long episode. I think they did 2 or 3 episodes a week back in Paramount in those days. And they said Shatner was such a great person for Jim Kirk because he played it really close to the chest, really close to the kind of, fun-loving kind of style that Shatner would have potentially as a starship captain. I think that authenticity is the most important ingredient that a leader can possibly have. Yes, you need to be courageous. Yes, you need to be inspiring and define a vision and selection and maintenance of the aim of that vision. But I think by and large, we are so desperately needing leaders who are real and not just going through the motions and the ticking of the boxes. And I know I sound a little bit like a pariah, and I don't mean to, because I do believe that the Canadian Armed Forces is extremely well led and is one of our, if not our most trusted institution in this country. It's among that rung. But there is a lot of ticket punching that goes on even today in 2017 in the Canadian Forces. And to me, that flies in the face of being authentic and being available to your men and women, and to actually working on problems instead of just filling out memos and having more meetings. And now you can say that's unfair. A guy never served in Ottawa, and that's right, by choice. I never did. But I was always true to myself, right? Even when I was sick and when I was looking up a dead horse's ass for 4 years of my life with PTSD, I always tried to be authentic and true to myself. And I think at the end of the day, that does define you as a leader, and that does become your strength. Our soldiers are smart. They can tell when you're putting on airs and just saying, well, soldiers first, and then issuing an order or a regulation that flies completely in the face of that. And yeah, I think for me, that is the essential ingredient. All the other stuff is important for sure, but at its heart's core, I think being that real person is probably among the most important ingredients.
Awesome. I probably almost see that coming, actually. I'd like to thank you again for your time. This has just been a great episode, one that I've been looking forward to for quite some time. For all the listeners out there, if you want to go to the show notes, it's going to be at movingforwardleadership.com/podcast/Conrad. And in there, you're going to see the show notes for this episode. But most importantly, I also have links for both of John Conrad's books, What the Thunder Said, as well as Among the Walking Wounded, so that you can go and have a look at them. And if you choose to do so, purchase them on your at your own accord. So feel free to check out the show notes again, movingforwardleadership.com/podcast/Conrad. John, this has been great again. I seriously thank you for your time. I know how busy you are, and especially the amount of time it took for us to schedule this. So thank you again for coming out and having this conversation with myself and the listeners out there.
Well, no, it's an absolute pleasure, and all the best wishes to you and your family and your career. It sounds like you've got a few more miles to put on, and that's great. And nothing but good wishes to your podcast listeners. So thank you for having me on.
Great. For the listeners out there, stay tuned because I'll be wrapping up with some important points that I've taken from today's episode. Just stand by now. Hey, everybody. Now, wasn't that a great show with Colonel Conrad? I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did because I thought it was fantastic. And Colonel Conrad, if you're listening to the final production here, again, thank you for taking the time. So throughout that whole episode, I took down some notes and I came up with 3 key takeaways for this episode, which I want to highlight to everybody right now. And I think the first key takeaway from this interview with Colonel Conrad was to have a strategic mindset. And you could hear it in his voice throughout the whole interview. Everything he talked about, it wasn't in the weeds, it wasn't super low-level issues, it was all strategic. And he even said it himself, dream big, keep dreaming. He still dreams today, despite, him saying he's near his end of his career or so forth. So it's just important to keep in mind, as leaders, yes, you're wherever you sit, regardless on your organization's totem pole, if you're a leader of a specific portion of that organization, then you need to have a strategic mindset for that part of the organization, as well as the whole organization itself. And I thought it really resonated within his whole dialogue throughout the whole interview. Everything. It was all about strategic mindset. It was great. The second key takeaway, which I took from his interview, was slow down. Take some time. And I've talked about this in the past, a condor moment where you take a breath and breather and analyze the actual problem ahead and look at it, what it means, right? And you see it throughout the interview. You can hear him talk about slowing down, and that was his advice that he would give to himself. Be patient. It will come, whatever it is. You will be able to figure it out. You just need to take the time to do so. And when he was talking about staff, people just scurrying from meeting to meeting without actually doing anything. Not that meetings aren't important, but what he was talking about is people need to take the time to actually analyze what's going on so that you can properly make decisions, informed decisions. I thought that was really great. And I think too many people out there are, like Colonel Conrad said, are just scurrying from back and forth and not actually taking your time, just trying to take down the next target, finish that next fall to get on to the next one without doing any proper thought to the one they just finished. So remember that. Let's slow down. And then the final thing, which stood out to me as a key takeaway, was his last bit there when I asked him what he thought a great lead, what meant to be a great leader, and that was authenticity. And I thought that really resonated back to my previous episode of being credible and how you can be credible. And I think those two things, well, maybe they're not exactly the same, they are definitely go hand in hand. And being authentic is absolutely crucial as a leader, because much like credibility, if you're not authentic, then people are going to see through you, and then you're going to lose your credibility. And that really stood out to me as a quality that you must have as a leader. So again, I hope these takeaways, these key takeaways for you resonate in the back of your mind like they did with mine. And I just wanted to highlight them for you at the end of today's show. Just like I do with every interview show, I'll go through all the key takeaways which have stood out to me throughout the interview. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did. I want to thank Colonel Conrad for taking the time out of his busy schedule to join me. And remember, keep pushing, keep trying, keep moving forward. Take care now.